Royal Guard Aaron stood at the far end of the grand hall while holding his spear near his side, and keeping his eyes sharp as the palace staff moved from one corner to another with steady steps because the queen demanded perfection at every hour of the day, and no one in the palace wanted to face her anger during an important royal gathering that evening, and Aaron himself felt the familiar pressure in his chest because Queen Alina had a talent for creating fear without raising her voice, and he knew that even a small mistake could change the fate of anyone who served near her throne. Princess Liana entered the hall slowly with her hands held together in front of her, and her simple white gown flowing behind her, as she walked with quiet steps that did not match the heavy sound of the palace drums outside, and Aaron noticed that her eyes did not shine with their usual calm and bright glow, but instead carried a strange mix of worry and silence that made him straighten his back even more because the princess never looked troubled, unless something serious was hidden in her heart. And he could not understand why she kept glancing to the side of the room where Queen Alina sat upon her tall seat, overseeing every moment with hard focus. The queen spoke in a calm voice that carried across the hall without effort, and she asked the advisors to bring the evening schedule and approved the list of guests before sunset, because the kingdom had to show unity and strength before the foreign leaders arrived the next morning. And while she talked, Aaron kept watching Princess Liana, who stood near one of the marble pillars with her fingers slightly shaking and her breathing slow and uneven as if she wanted to speak but did not know if she could trust anyone around her, and Aaron knew that something was terribly wrong because the princess normally moved with gentle energy and peaceful confidence, but now she looked like a bird trapped inside a space that was closing in from all sides. As the servants walked around with small trays and papers, Aaron stepped a little closer to his assigned post, which happened to be near the princess but not close enough to speak without reason, and he tried to make his movement appear natural because he did not want Queen Alina to suspect anything about his attention, since the queen disliked when guards focused on anything other than their strict orders, and Aaron remembered clearly how one guard had been removed from duty for simply showing sympathy when a young servant tripped on the steps, and Queen Alina believed that emotional guards showed weakness, and weakness had no place near the throne. Princess Liana kept her head lowered as she walked slowly along the edge of the hall, and Aaron noticed how her lips pressed together tightly as if she was holding back a thought that frightened her more than anything she had ever faced before, and he could not stop himself from feeling a deep worry because he had sworn to protect the royal family with loyalty and courage, but he also knew that protecting sometimes meant making choices that were dangerous for the guard himself, especially when the threat came from someone inside the palace, and he wondered if the princess was afraid of something that she could not reveal openly in front of her mother, the queen. When the queen ordered everyone to pause and stand still for a moment, Princess Liana walked toward Aaron with careful steps that almost looked hesitant, and the moment she came near him, he lowered his head to show respect as he had been trained, but before he could step aside she moved even closer until she stood right next to him, and lifted her eyes with a quiet urgency that made his heartbeat quicken because her face carried fear and pleading at the same time, something he had never seen directed toward a guard in his entire service. She leaned slightly forward, pretending to adjust the small clasp on her gown, and in that brief moment, she whispered a soft, strained word that shook Aaron more than any command he had ever received, and the word was hidden behind her slow breath like a secret carried across a deep well, and she whispered a single plea that chilled him from his spine to his fingers, and she said, SOS. Aaron felt the world inside the grand hall grow still as if time refused to move, and he looked at her with the calm expression that guards were taught to maintain, but inside his mind a storm grew louder and stronger because no royal would ever whisper such a signal unless danger was close and real and pressing upon them, and he wanted to ask her more, but he could not speak without breaking protocol, and Queen Alina had already turned her head slightly as if she sensed something unusual near the princess. Princess Liana stepped back and placed her hands behind her as she tried to steady her breath, and Aaron kept his expression carved into stone, though his heart thudded sharply because he did not know what danger she meant, but he understood that she trusted him enough to give him the warning, and he knew he could not ignore it because his entire duty, his entire life, his entire purpose was built on the promise to protect the innocent, even if the danger came wrapped inside royal silk. Queen Alina rose from her seat and walked toward the center of the hall with a slow, graceful motion that made the air tighten as every servant bowed lower, and every advisor stepped back, and Aaron watched her from the corner of his vision because he could not look directly at her while on duty, and he noticed that Princess Liana looked down quickly as the queen approached, and her shoulders stiffened with silent fear as though she felt trapped between duty and danger. The queen inspected the arrangement of the hall, and nodded in approval, though her eyes paused for a moment on Princess Liana with a sharpness that made Aaron feel the weight of suspicion spreading through the room, and he wondered if the queen had heard something or sensed something, or simply knew the princess was not acting like her usual calm and gentle self, and the thought that the queen might already be aware of something hidden made Aaron uneasy in a way he had never known before. Princess Liana kept her voice quiet as she stepped away from the queen and moved toward the far exit as if she needed air, and Aaron followed at a distance as his duty required, and he noticed that her steps were faster now, and her shoulders trembled lightly under the soft fabric of her gown, and he felt an urgent need to protect her, even though he had no clear idea what threats surrounded her, but he understood that she had whispered SOS because she believed she had no one else to trust within these walls. As the princess reached the tall doors, she paused and looked back at Aaron with eyes that held a silent message, and he knew that she needed help more than ever, and he realized that defying protocol might be the only way to save her from whatever danger she feared, and he also knew that breaking protocol inside the palace could cost him everything, but he could not turn away from the plea she had given him, and he could not pretend he had not heard the quiet SOS meant only for him. And so as the doors closed behind her, Aaron made a decision that would change the fate of the kingdom because he understood that the princess was in danger, and he had sworn with every part of his life to protect her even if the threat came from within the royal family itself. Aaron stepped out of the grand hall with steady silent steps while keeping his breath calm, even though his mind spun with questions that pressed against his thoughts because the single whispered signal from Princess Liana carried more weight than any command he had ever received in his years of service, and he understood that she did not choose that word lightly since SOS was used only in moments when no other form of help could reach her, and as he moved through the long corridor, he noticed that the palace guards near the entrance kept their usual stance, but their eyes drifted toward the direction where the princess had gone, which made him wonder if they too had sensed something strange in her behavior. Princess Liana walked quickly ahead of him through the corridor with her gown brushing against the smooth stone floor, and she did not look back this time because she knew that Aaron would follow at the required distance, and that alone told him that she trusted him enough to rely on his presence without speaking, and he felt a tight pull in his chest knowing that he now carried a responsibility that could change how the entire palace viewed him if he acted without caution, but he also knew he could not abandon her when she had reached out to him in fear. When the princess reached the garden courtyard, she paused near the fountain which stood at the center with clear water rising and falling in a quiet stream that filled the space with a soft calming sound, and she placed her hand gently on the edge of the fountain as if she needed something steady to hold, while she gathered her courage to face whatever danger pressed on her, and Aaron slowed his pace as he entered the courtyard because he could not approach her directly without breaking protocol. But he needed to be close enough to hear if she tried to speak again. Princess Liana looked around the courtyard to make sure no one else was near, and then she finally lifted her head toward Aaron with eyes filled with fear and silent pleading, and he felt a strong urge to step forward, but he held himself still because he knew that a guard moving too quickly might attract unwanted attention from anyone watching from the windows above, and he wanted to protect her without exposing her to even greater risk. After a long breath, the princess spoke in a soft trembling voice that barely reached him across the space, and she said that something was wrong inside the palace, and she said that she had overheard a quiet talk near the inner chambers where she was not supposed to be at that hour, and she had heard her mother the queen speaking with two advisors in voices that carried tension and sharpness, and she had heard her own name mentioned in a way that made her fear for her safety, and Aaron listened with complete focus because he knew that any danger involving the royal family would demand careful steps and a loyal heart. Princess Liana looked down at the fountain as she explained that she believed someone was watching her movements, and she felt that the queen had become distant and cold toward her in the last few days, and it frightened her because she did not know why, and she did not know if she could speak openly to anyone without risking punishment or misunderstanding, and she said that she did not trust the advisors because they always seemed to stand too close and speak too softly whenever she entered a room. And she felt trapped inside her own home. Aaron kept his expression steady, though his thoughts stirred like a dark river because he knew the queen held strict control over the palace, and she disliked when anyone questioned her choices, and if the princess had truly overheard something serious, then she was right to seek help, and Aaron knew he had to protect her, even if it meant stepping beyond his assigned role because he had taken an oath to guard the royal family, and he believed that oath included keeping the princess safe from hidden threats as well as physical ones. The princess stepped closer to him, though still keeping a respectful distance that guards and royals were expected to follow, and she lowered her voice again as she said that she had whispered SOS in the hall because she could not wait any longer, and she felt that someone wanted to limit her freedom inside the palace, and she did not know who she could trust, and her eyes filled with quiet worry as she asked Aaron if he could help her find the truth without letting anyone know she had asked him, and he felt the weight of her trust settle deeply into his heart. Aaron answered in a calm, steady voice that he would do everything within his duty to protect her and keep her safe, and he told her that she did not need to fear as long as he was near, and she looked at him with relief that softened the tight fear on her face, and the moment reminded him why he had chosen to become a royal guard, because he wanted to protect those who could not always speak for themselves, and the princess looked like someone carrying a burden she could no longer hold alone. A faint sound echoed from the far archway, and the princess quickly stepped back and straightened her posture as a palace attendant entered the courtyard carrying a scroll and looking around for her, and the princess immediately hid her fear behind a calm expression that Aaron admired because she had learned to guard her emotions in a place where every look was judged and every slip could be questioned, and the attendant informed her that the queen wished to see her in the upper study before the evening gathering, and Aaron noticed the slight tremor in her hands, though her voice stayed steady when she said she would go at once. As the princess began walking back toward the palace doors, Aaron followed at the proper distance while keeping his senses sharp, because he understood that the meeting with the queen might reveal more clues about the danger she feared, or it might deepen the threats surrounding her, and he felt a tightening in his chest as he watched her walk with slow, steady steps as if she was preparing herself for something painful or unexpected, and he wished he could know exactly what danger waited behind those doors so he could act before anything harmed her. They moved through another corridor where the walls were lined with long paintings of past rulers, and Aaron noticed that each painting seemed to watch the princess with silent judgment as she walked between them, and he knew that the history of the palace carried both glory and shadows, and he wondered if the danger she sensed was connected to old promises or hidden plans made long before she was born, and he felt a deep need to protect her from whatever those shadows held. When they reached the stairs leading to the upper study, Aaron stopped at the base because guards were not permitted beyond that point unless they were summoned directly, and Princess Liana paused briefly and looked back at him with eyes that carried a silent message of fear and trust and hope, and he nodded once to reassure her that he would stay close and watch for any change, and she stepped forward into the stairway with slow, careful steps that echoed softly in the quiet space. Aaron remained at the bottom and waited with steady patience, though every part of him felt tense and alert because he did not know how the queen would speak to the princess or if she had noticed something unusual in the hall earlier, and he feared that the princess might be walking into a trap of quiet questions and sharp words disguised beneath gentle tone, and he wished he could stand by her side, but he had to trust that she would stay strong. Minutes passed like slow falling sand, and Aaron looked up the stairway repeatedly while resisting the urge to climb even one step, because he knew he could not break protocol in this part of the palace, and yet his heart felt heavy with worry as he waited for the sound of returning footsteps. Then at last, he heard them, but the footsteps were not calm or steady, and the princess appeared at the top of the stairs with her breath short, and her face pale, as though she had heard something that shook her deeply, and Aaron felt a cold wave move through him as he saw fear shining in her eyes stronger than before. And he understood in that moment that whatever she had learned inside the study had confirmed her worst fears. And as she reached the last step, she whispered only one quiet sentence meant only for him, and her voice trembled with raw truth as she said that the danger was real and closer than she had ever imagined. Princess Liana stood at the bottom of the stairs with her breath uneven and her hands shaking gently at her sides while her eyes held a deep fear that told Aaron something inside the upper study had shaken her more than she could express, and he stepped closer by one small pace, though still keeping the boundary of his duty because he needed to be near enough to hear every word she whispered, and he felt the air around them grow heavier as if the palace itself listened to their quiet exchange. She leaned slightly toward him with a trembling voice and said that she had heard her mother speaking with the advisors about a plan that involved her safety and her future in a way she never expected, and her voice carried a soft ache as she explained that the queen believed the kingdom needed a stronger image and stricter control, and the advisors had suggested limiting the movement of the princess to ensure she remained under close watch, and they spoke as if she were a threat instead of a daughter, and Aaron felt his heart tighten because he could see how deeply those words had cut her. Princess Liana continued in a whisper that the queen had not shown any anger in the study, but there was something cold in her tone, something distant, something that made the princess feel like she was being pushed aside from decisions that affected her life, and she said she could not understand why she was being treated as a risk when she had done nothing but follow every duty and lesson she had been given, and Aaron felt a quiet flame rise inside him because he had seen her kindness, her honesty, and her gentle spirit, and nothing about her deserved fear or limitation. As she spoke, Aaron stepped just a little closer, though still careful not to cross the invisible line that separated guard and princess, and he asked in a low, steady voice if she believed the queen herself posed a direct danger, or if the advisors were guiding her into decisions she might not fully understand, and Princess Liana shook her head slowly, and said she did not know, but she felt watched, and she felt trapped, and she believed someone wanted to control her steps before she could reveal something important. Aaron asked what that important thing was, and she looked around the corridor with wide, worried eyes as if she feared the walls had ears, and then she said she had discovered documents in the private library 2 nights earlier that suggested a change in the royal line of succession, and she did not understand everything written in them, but she believed someone wanted to alter the future of the kingdom and hide it behind strategy and secrecy, and her voice wavered as she said she feared this change involved removing her from public life in a gentle but permanent way. Aaron felt the weight of her words settle in his chest, and he understood now why she had whispered SOS, and why her fear had grown each hour, because if someone tried to change the royal line without clear reason, it could create chaos and danger, and the princess would be the one at the center of that storm, and he knew he could not let harm reach her, even if the danger came from deep within the palace where he had sworn loyalty, and he felt torn between his duty to the crown and his duty to protect the innocent heart standing in front of him. The princess held her hands tightly together as she said she had tried to speak to her mother earlier in the week, but the queen had dismissed her concerns and told her she needed rest, and then the queen had assigned 2 new attendants to her chamber attendants the princess did not know and did not trust, and Aaron felt a strange chill as he listened, because he knew the palace often changed staff, but not without reason and not without warning, and the timing of it all felt too heavy to ignore. A guard from another post appeared at the end of the corridor, and Aaron immediately stepped back to his correct position, while Princess Liana straightened her posture, and wiped the fear from her expression with quiet courage, and the guard bowed slightly, and said the queen wanted her to prepare for the evening gathering, and the princess thanked him with a calm voice that did not reveal how her heart was racing, and Aaron admired her strength because she hid her fear behind a composed face despite the danger closing in. As the guard left the corridor, Aaron moved close enough to whisper without drawing attention, and he told her that he would help her uncover the truth, and he would not let anyone harm her no matter the cost, and she looked at him with relief softening her eyes because she knew she could not face this alone, and he said she must go to her chamber for now, and act as if nothing had happened while he searched for signs around the palace that might reveal who wanted to pressure her into silence. Princess Liana nodded with quiet trust, and walked toward her chamber with graceful steps, though Aaron noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, and the way she kept glancing behind her, as if she feared someone might follow, and he waited until she reached the end of the corridor before turning in the opposite direction where the queen's advisors kept their offices, because he needed answers, and he needed to know how deep the danger reached. Aaron walked through the dim corridor that led to the archive rooms and noticed that 2 advisors were standing near a side door speaking in low voices while holding scrolls with royal seals, and he positioned himself near a column pretending to inspect the wall lanterns while listening to their words, and he heard them mention the evening gathering and the plan to make a final decision soon regarding the princess, and they spoke with confidence as if they believed no one could challenge their intentions, and their tone carried a sharpness that made Aaron feel a deep unease. The advisors moved inside the room and closed the door, and Aaron waited until the footsteps faded before approaching the door quietly, and he leaned close just enough to hear faint voices inside, and he caught fragments of sentences about securing control, and ensuring compliance, and preparing for tomorrow, and he felt a cold understanding settle in his mind, because whatever they were planning was not in the interest of the princess nor the kingdom, and he knew that he had stepped into a dangerous path that could cost him everything. He moved away from the door before anyone noticed him, and walked back toward the main hall with steady steps while thinking carefully about his next action, because he needed proof, not just suspicion, and he needed a way to protect the princess without alerting the queen or the advisors that someone was investigating their intentions, and he thought about the documents the princess mentioned in the private library, and he realized that might be the key to understanding everything. Aaron decided he would enter the private library that night once the palace grew quiet, because he knew the library held old records and hidden documents that only a few were allowed to see, and if the princess had found something dangerous there, then someone might try to remove or alter those documents before anyone else discovered them, and he could not allow that to happen. Before returning to his usual post, he stepped outside to the open balcony that overlooked the garden where the princess had stood earlier, and he looked out at the quiet space while thinking of her trembling voice, her worried eyes, and her whispered plea, and he promised himself that he would not let fear or danger break her spirit, and he would stand between her and whatever threatened her, even if he had to defy every rule written for royal guards. As the sun lowered into the horizon, casting warm golden light across the palace walls, Aaron felt the first true step of his choice settle into his heart, and he knew there was no turning back because the princess had placed her trust in him and danger was already moving closer with every passing moment. The palace grew quieter as the evening light softened across the tall stone corridors, and Aaron felt the shift in the air that always came before night because the day staff returned to their quarters and the guards changed posts in a steady rhythm that echoed through the halls like a slow, calm heartbeat, and he knew this was the best time for him to move without drawing attention since most people focused only on their assigned paths at this hour, and the queen remained busy preparing for the gathering, which meant her advisors would be scattered between tasks. Aaron waited near the garden archway until the final group of servants passed, and then he turned toward the west wing where the private library sat hidden behind thick wooden doors, and he felt his own steps grow firmer with purpose because he understood that the answers he needed could be inside those shelves, and he had to reach them before anyone else tried to hide or remove them, and he kept his posture steady to appear like a guard doing a routine check so no one would question his presence. The corridor leading to the library was dim with only a few lanterns burning low, and the shadows along the walls made every sound echo more clearly, and Aaron slowed his pace as he noticed faint voices coming from around the corner where the two advisors had gone earlier, and he paused near a pillar, and listened carefully to the quiet words drifting into the hall, and though he could not hear every detail, he caught enough to know they were still speaking about the princess and the plan that involved her. One advisor mentioned that the queen must not hesitate in the final decision, and another said the princess had grown too curious and might interfere with their arrangements, and Aaron felt a strong anger rise inside him because these men spoke about the princess as if she were a threat instead of a person, and he knew now that she was right to fear them and right to whisper SOS, and he pressed himself against the column until their voices faded as they moved farther down the hall, and he waited until silence returned before continuing toward the library. When he reached the tall wooden doors, he placed his hand on the iron handle and pushed gently until the door opened with a soft creak that sounded louder in the still corridor than he wished, but no one appeared, and he stepped inside the wide room where shelves rose from floor to ceiling, and long tables stood waiting for readers, though the library was empty at this hour, and he closed the door behind him while keeping his breath slow and quiet because he felt the importance of every moment. The private library carried a calm smell of old parchment and polished wood, and Aaron moved through the aisles with careful steps until he reached the corner where the royal records were kept in organized rows according to date and event, and he remembered the princess had said she found the documents 2 nights earlier in a section where she never expected to find them, and he scanned the shelves for signs of recent movement. He noticed a small stack of scrolls pushed slightly out of alignment, and he reached for the top one with quiet fingers and unrolled it under the gentle glow of the lantern on the nearby table, and as he read through the neat handwriting he felt a chill move through him because the document spoke of a proposed shift in the line of succession, a shift that placed the princess under restricted guardianship for an undefined period and justified this with vague reasons about guidance and stability. Aaron realized this document could be used to remove Princess Liana from public duties without raising alarm among citizens, and it would place control of the kingdom in the hands of the queen and her advisors without opposition, and he felt a deep unease because the princess had not been informed or consulted, and this decision would silence her voice and remove her influence from the court, and he knew that if the advisors wished to change the kingdom's direction, this was the easiest way to do it. He carefully rolled the scroll again and placed it back exactly where he found it because he knew removing anything would raise suspicion, and he continued searching through the nearby shelves until he found another document sealed with a symbol he had seen earlier on the advisor's scrolls, and this one described a plan to present the change to the council after the evening gathering, and once the queen voiced support the council would be expected to agree without question, and Aaron felt a weight settle in his chest because everything was happening faster than he thought. He stepped back from the shelves and looked around the quiet room as he thought about what he should do next because he could not reveal the documents directly without causing chaos, and he could not confront the queen without risking immediate punishment, and he needed time to gather the right evidence and protect the princess before the advisors forced the decision onto the council, and he knew time was slipping away with each passing minute. As he left the library he walked with steady steps, but inside he felt the pressure of the danger growing heavier, and he moved toward the princess's chamber because he needed to tell her what he had discovered, and he wanted to make sure she was safe before the gathering began, and as he approached the corridor leading to her room, he noticed 2 unfamiliar guards standing near the entrance, and they looked alert, as if expecting someone to come by. and he recognized them as the new guards the queen had chosen for the princess's protection. Aaron slowed his pace and observed their stance and the way they whispered to each other without noticing him, and he felt a prickling unease because their behavior did not match that of guards assigned to protect a royal member, and instead it looked like they were watching for someone who might try to approach, and he knew the princess had been right not to trust them because they seemed placed there to control her movement, not ensure her safety. He approached with firm steps and greeted them with the standard guard salute, and they straightened quickly and returned the gesture, though one of them looked at him with a cautious expression and asked why he had come to this part of the palace, and Aaron kept his voice firm yet calm and said he was sent to check if the princess was ready for the evening gathering, and he knew the new guards could not question an official request from another royal guard without cause. The two guards hesitated but then stepped aside, allowing him to move toward the princess's door, and he knocked softly and waited until her voice answered from inside, and he entered the room with a calm expression, even though his heart felt heavy with urgency because he knew the danger was now immediate and the time for silence had ended. Princess Liana stood near her window with her hands resting on the edge of the table, and she turned toward him with worry still present in her eyes, and Aaron spoke in a low firm voice as he told her what he had found in the library about the change in succession, and the plan to confine her under guardianship, and the intention to push the decision through the council after the gathering, and she listened with growing fear as each word fell into place, like cold stones. Her hands trembled as she held the back of the chair, and she asked him what they should do because she could not face the advisors alone, and she could not speak against her mother without proof, and she did not know how to stop a decision stronger than her own voice, and Aaron stepped closer, though not crossing the respectful distance, and said that they needed to act before the advisors presented the new plan, and they needed to reveal the truth in a way that no one could deny. Princess Liana took a slow breath as she gathered her strength, and she looked at Aaron with growing determination because she understood now that running from fear would not save her, and she needed to stand strong even if the danger grew larger, and she said she would not allow anyone to silence her or steal her future, and Aaron felt a spark of hope rise inside him because he saw courage returning to her heart. And as the final bell rang through the palace announcing the start of the evening gathering, both Aaron and the princess understood that the moment to act had arrived, and the truth would either protect her or place both of them in greater danger than before. The evening gathering began with a soft sound of golden bells echoing through the palace halls, and Princess Liana felt each ring settle heavily in her chest, as if the sound itself carried the weight of everything she feared and everything she needed to do, and she stood near the entrance of her chamber with Aaron beside her, though still at the respectful distance that palace rules demanded, and her hands trembled for a moment before she forced them still because she knew she could not show fear tonight, not when so much depended on her courage. Aaron looked at her with steady calm eyes that held quiet reassurance, and even though he could not offer comfort through touch or words beyond duty, she felt strength rise inside her knowing he stood with her in this hidden battle. And she breathed slowly as she stepped forward and opened her chamber door, and the guards stationed outside watched her closely, but allowed her to pass without comment, though Aaron noticed the sharpness in their eyes and knew they had been ordered to monitor every step she took. The corridors glowed with warm lantern light as guests dressed in fine clothing walked toward the great hall, and their soft conversation mixed with gentle music from the far end of the palace, and everything looked peaceful on the surface, yet Liana felt danger moving in the shadows around her like an unseen hand reaching for her, and Aaron walked behind her with firm steps, keeping a silent watch over every corner and every face because this night could change both their lives. When they reached the grand hall, the tall doors stood open, and the queen welcomed guests with a calm regal smile that never seemed to reach her eyes, and Princess Liana felt a tightening in her chest as those same eyes fell on her with a slow sharp glance as if measuring her mood and her movement, and she bowed her head in a respectful greeting, though inside she felt a quiet ache because she did not understand why her own mother would allow such dangerous plans to move forward. Aaron took his position along the wall with the other guards while keeping his attention fixed on the princess, and he scanned the hall with careful detail, noticing the advisors standing near the throne speaking quietly with each other, and watching the princess with expressions that carried control and hidden intent, and he knew that tonight they would try to begin the plan that threatened her freedom, and he had to be ready before they could take any step toward it. Princess Liana moved through the hall with calm grace, greeting guests politely and listening to their kind words, though she struggled to keep her voice steady as fear lingered inside her, but she kept walking because she understood that she must appear strong and composed if she wanted to protect herself from the advisor's plans, and she glanced toward Aaron only once, and her eyes told him that she was ready to face what must be faced. When most of the guests had arrived, the queen stepped onto the small raised platform at the front of the hall, and lifted her hand to signal silence, and every voice in the room faded as the hall filled with stillness, and the queen began to speak about unity and strength, and the future of the kingdom, and her tone was calm yet firm as she prepared the hall for the announcement she planned to make later in the evening, and Aaron felt the tension rise in the air because he knew what was coming. Princess Liana stood among the guests near the front of the hall, and her breath grew tight as she listened to her mother speak, and she knew that if she remained silent the advisors would present their plan, and the queen would support it, and her freedom would be taken from her before she could speak for herself, and she felt fear pressing against her heart, but she remembered Aaron's steady promise, and she remembered her own strength, and she took a slow deep breath, as she gathered every piece of courage she had left. When the queen paused to reach for a scroll, the advisor beside her stepped forward preparing to speak, and in that moment Princess Liana stepped out from the row of guests and moved toward the front with quiet yet firm steps that made several people turn in surprise, and even the queen lifted her head with a brief moment of confusion as Liana stood before her, and bowed, only slightly before raising her head with calm determination. The advisor tried to block her speech by stepping forward, but Princess Liana gently raised her hand to stop him, and then she spoke clearly to the gathered hall saying that she wished to address the people and the council about her own future and her own role in the kingdom, and her voice carried strength that reached every corner of the hall, and for the first time that evening her fear turned into resolve. She said she had become aware of a decision being prepared without her knowledge, and she stated that she had found documents in the private library that outlined a plan to restrict her freedom and remove her voice from the council, and she said that she could not remain silent while her future was being shaped behind closed doors, and she asked the council and the people to hear her truth before any decision was made. The hall erupted with whispers and startled gasps, and the queen looked sharply at the advisors who exchanged quick, uneasy glances because they had not expected the princess to speak, and they certainly had not expected her to reveal the existence of the documents, and Aaron watched from his position with a growing sense of pride because the princess had done what few dared to do in the palace: speak the truth aloud. The queen stepped forward with a composed expression, though Aaron noticed a flicker of something uncertain in her eyes, and she addressed her daughter saying that decisions about the kingdom were made for the good of all, but Princess Liana replied calmly that she believed decisions involving her life should at least be shared with her, and she spoke gently but firmly about trust, about openness, and about the responsibility they all shared to protect the kingdom without silencing its future. Several council members nodded in agreement, and others whispered to each other about fairness and transparency, and slowly the queen understood that the room was no longer under the advisor's influence, and that the people were listening to the princess with support growing around her, and the queen looked toward her advisors with suspicion, as if seeing their intentions clearly for the first time. The advisor nearest to the queen tried to speak again, but the queen raised her hand sharply to silence him, and she looked at the princess with a steady gaze, and after a long quiet moment she said she would review the documents personally, and no changes to succession or guardianship would move forward without open council discussion, and she added that the princess would remain free to continue her role in the kingdom, and the gathering murmured with relief and support. Princess Liana bowed her head as gratitude filled her heart, and she looked toward Aaron, who stood tall at the edge of the hall, and though he did not move, his eyes carried quiet pride and reassurance, and she knew she would never forget the strength he had given her on the day she needed it most. The advisors stood pale and silent as their plan fell apart, and the queen ordered a full investigation into the documents and the people behind them, and Aaron knew that justice would now move through the palace with careful and steady steps because the queen no longer trusted the men who had tried to guide her decisions. When the gathering ended, the princess stepped toward Aaron as the hall slowly emptied, and she spoke in a soft, grateful voice saying that she could not have faced the danger without his help, and Aaron replied with calm respect that he had only followed his duty to protect her, and she smiled gently because she understood that his duty had been more than simple obedience. As the night grew quiet, the danger that once surrounded her began to fade, and Princess Liana finally felt free to breathe again, knowing she had not faced the threat alone, and Aaron took his place at her side with steady confidence, knowing his loyalty had changed not only the fate of the princess but the future of the kingdom.